Absolute pains in the arse. And therefore, what we actually need is something that actually helps us get through the points at which we think, what on earth am I doing here? Why are we with this lot? And one of the great things that the faiths have is the skill and the knowledge of how to facilitate, how to help flourishing, and how to create a neutral but charged space, a sacred space, a safe place where partnerships can be done. And the final one, a recommendation that every single organization here today, within the next 6 months, creates a new partnership with a group that they previously had either never heard of or would never have thought of working with. And that actually, by creating a new partnership, we could have something like 200 new partnerships within a year, of which probably half will fail abysmally. The other half, about a quarter, will stagger on, but a quarter actually might make the world a better place. That's our ideas.
So thank you very much, Martin. Martin Palmer was representing the P from partnership, but we cannot have partners without people, can we? So let's move to the people group. I think it's Neil. Is it you or Chiara?
That's me.
Neil Thorns from CAFOD is representing then the group on people.
Yeah, I was hoping to go last and I would have captured more of the voice. Thanks, Augusto. So we had a really rich discussion and I will try to capture it. It broke down into a number of different areas. So the first thing was around, we talked about some specific themes, and I think there was a general acceptance that the SDGs were, the things that they put out there for people were going to be good, but actually we wanted to make sure that within that kind of the targets which the SDGs set, that they went further. So when we thought about health, when we thought about education, when we thought about work. So for example, in education, actually, how do you make sure that we are educating a new kind of set of leaders on ecology? And how do we make sure that we are teaching them around how to respect each other and building peace and good communities going forward, and the important role that education has in that. So that was one example. Or work, for example, is another specific theme where actually we're facing this fourth industrial revolution where the nature of work will change quite dramatically, and actually religions in that sense of how you work being an element of flourishing. How do we make sure that that happens? So there's something about the specific themes. There's something about actually how do we as religions also share the resources that we've got, whether they are the resources around our faith, and renew them and refresh them and get them out there in terms of the issues that we face, or there may be some practical stuff that we've done as religions, and how do we share those and keep, rather than reinventing the wheel, do that. And then there was something about just building and support. So how do we dialogue and how do we engage better and how do we support young leaders? And then act. So actually, how can we organise? There were some specific examples around people suggested something around the specific SDGs, which are going to be talked about at the UN in September. How do we make sure that we influence our national governments about the way that they approach the SDGs and make sure that they are universal and not seen to be just about developing countries, but actually seen to be about poverty in countries in Northern Europe, for example. And how do we actually support the young people's stuff which is going? There's a lot of talk about young people, but actually when they talk about the school strikes, for example, actually where's faith's role in supporting some of that action? And that may be coming into the planet one as well. Just very quickly, we talked about inequality, universality. We talked about really important messaging around friendship. So actually, how do we take this notion of friendship back into our churches, back into our social networks? A really lovely image there in terms of doing it. And I think last thing to finish with was just the issue of women and gender. And that came out very strongly in the discussions we had in these last couple of days. But also, I think, in this group about how do you get those voices in, and how do you, especially in a conference around religion, how do you make sure that you get those voices from women, from the global south, and make sure that they're heard and listened to, but also about when in different faith traditions, how do you make sure that women are being represented there when there's not necessarily a hierarchical structure which enables that to happen. And I think that's a really important point, because we recognise that obviously so much when you talk about people in the SDGs is either reliant on women or affects women, or they are at the heart of tackling those things. And therefore I think they have to be much more central in terms of our conversations when we have these kind of discussions going forward. I apologise if I've missed out any important points, but it was I've captured them all and we will be writing them up. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Sorry, Bruno. Can I continue with the closing the growth groups, and then I will give the floor to you?
I just wanted to say that if you can keep
yes
one paper, it's all right, because it's very important to keep this memory of your discussion. Okay, thank you. It could be proposition, conviction, proposition, challenges. You know, but you are going to write as you said.
Thank you, Bruno, for that. Yes, we are going, just to a clarification, the steering group is going to further elaborate what you discuss in the group. So don't worry, this is not going to be missed. We're going to further elaborate, circulate it so people can give their opinions. But I will have to ask Regina if they can put a 5 minutes clock maximum, so you cannot exceed 5 minutes while presenting your group, okay? And if it's shorter, it's even better. So we moved to Abena. Are you ready? So Abena is representing the group on prosperity. So she's going to bring us through some proposals from that group.
Thank you very much.
And she's from Christian Aid, sorry.
So I'm representing the group on prosperity. And I think for us, what would represent an image is how currently just 26 individuals are controlling almost all of the world's wealth, and how we can redistribute that, and how we can make sure that we have shared equitably amongst all society the benefits of development. So for us, some of the things we talked about in terms of prosperity was the fact that in terms of a call to action for an interreligious platform like us, and what we should be looking at is to redefine prosperity. It definitely should not be all about GDP. We had earlier some of the discussions about gross national happiness. What about all those indicators and how we currently measure prosperity? So the first thing we want to advocate is that we redefine prosperity and what that means. In terms of investment, we currently had how in Brazil there has been a disaster. That was an attempt at providing some structures. That was an attempt. It was an investment attempt which went, unfortunately, very wrong. So some of the things we have to define is what a good investment is. What would be some of our criteria when we talk about good investment? For us, what does that mean? There are several criteria out there, but in terms of an interreligious delegation for us, what would we want to talk about when we say a good investment or a just economy? The third thing we talked about was the fact that we need to advocate to change some macro-level global economics. We do a lot of work as faith-based organizations, as churches, as different religions, but we also need to get into the spaces where we can advocate to change some of the macro-level issues where it has to do with the multinational and financial institutions. And then at micro-level, we also need to advocate to get communities to participate in the discussions of prosperity. We need to hear a lot more local voices in some of what we do. It should be about the voice at the grassroots level and how that comes to how we link some of our processes right from grassroots, local, national, regional, and global. And then the other issue we also mentioned was the fact that we need to include human flourishing to what a just economy should look like. And I think my colleague just mentioned that. It's a very important point. How do we ensure that ethical financial structures share the wealth and redistribute equitably amongst all sections of society? And at that point, we would have to see the kind of values we have talked about here. It's interesting how all the faiths, irrespective of jurisdiction, irrespective of where we are coming from, have common values, but somehow we do not necessarily see those values permeating prosperity discussions, except for maybe when we meet in some of these conferences. We have to try and practicalize some of that. How do we bring the values we so passionately hold to the discussions and sharing and redistribution of wealth? And we also talked about the fact that we need to include some positive examples. I think when we talk about prosperity, the narrative is replete, unfortunately, with negative examples. But there are positive examples, and we heard from our colleague from FinTech today. There are a lot of positive examples, and from where we come from, we have a lot of them, and we need to amplify a lot more the positive examples so that others can also learn from it. We also talked about the role of government. We have talked a lot over the past two days about private sector partnerships and all that. But one thing we are finding in our group in the discussion about prosperity is the role of government. We complement most of the time initiatives governments are implementing. We definitely cannot take the space of government. So we definitely need to partner with governments because the whole issue at the end of the day is sustainability. And when we look at sustainability, if we talk about sustainability of the SDGs, you want to look at governance structures which will last centuries. And we also said that faith communities should move our money first, and the rest of the people would follow us. When we talk about investment, we have different schemes all over the place. We should be living and walking the talk in terms of ethicals and moral, and then the others will follow us. Thank you on behalf of the Prosperity team.
Thank you, Abena. And we will move towards peace. You were very lucky because you had, I think, Adama Dieng with you, but I think so. Amparo from Caritas Internacionales will represent the group on peace. So, Amparo.
Yes, in fact, we were very lucky because of that, and we were very lucky because of the high creativity of my group, with very, very important inputs from all of them. So we really recognize your wonderful work on being concrete and as much as possible. So we would like to call on action, concrete actions as faith-based organizations, call on actions to the nations, and call on actions to the international level. So call for actions at faith-based organizations. We think that there is need for a better understanding and mutual respect among religious leaders. All faith must be backed by action for humanity. As faith-based organizations, we also think that there is need, and it's a call, to give more spaces to young people to act at all levels. More grassroots actions on dignity of difference by religious leaders, because we think that there is need for a better understanding of the different religions at the local level. Forgiveness and reconciliation initiatives are also needed at all levels, not only at the local, but all levels. We think that it's important to be bearing in mind. And the use of technology and social media to promote peace by mobilizing masses, because we think there is need for more narrative, positive stories of change, rather than on negative and negative stories. We would like also to highlight what we call for action at the international level, the need to create more spaces for civil society and faith-based organizations, to include all of them. There is need to bring policy makers from the global, from the national, from the local, to the dialogue table with us. We need to, as nations, we also call on promotion of standards of good governance as a first requisite for peace. And there are other 4 issues regarding the global one. I think, and we think as a peace working group, that it's important to highlight the different peace in existing initiatives around the globe. We think that there are indeed many good experiences around the globe on peace, but it's important to highlight them. We think and we call on to create hubs for learning and use the social media to make the most of that. We also would like to call on to plan for an international event for peace with involvement of the faith traditions, and even to join as faith-based organizations the World Peace Day, And I think that's, and also to have, I forgot to say, locally speaking, we also spoke about to have focal people at the local level to ensure that the message is understood. So these are our call for action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amparo. The only thing, before I give the word to Chiara from SITSE, that is representing the planet, the group of the planet, Amparo was talking about a call. We call for beware of what you're asking, because we will call you back. Next week, I will send an email to everyone who is promoting these calls and say, okay, you call, and then what should we do? How do we do it? So beware, because I will have all these emails. You will have all these emails coming back. And then Chiara Martinelli from SITSE is representing the group on Planet. All yours.
Okay, thanks, Augusto. I will try to not use the word we call then. Okay, so we also had a great discussion, a great group, very diverse but very active. I'm sorry for the ones that could not speak because we also were a very big group. So around the discussions, I'm going to summarize it like through 3 principles that were going all over our discussions and 4 call for actions. So the 3 principles were A, that we need to celebrate, because we heard so many good experiences that are already going on, and especially as far as religions and faith communities walking the talk. So we need to celebrate those and give more visibility to those experiences, and also to raise the bar, so to continue, to not stop, and to go even more ambitious. Secondly, the second principle that was going all over the discussion is urgency, and we spoke a lot about it in the last 2 days, so I'm not going to repeat myself. And the third one is, out ones were to the call, to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So to keep those two dimensions together, we saw that all the calls and all the actions that we needed to bring forward as faith community, we have an added value to keep the inner conversion and the structural change together. So we wanted to make sure that all the actions that we are promoting and the messages that we are calling for keep those 2 dimensions together, because this is also the added value of our religious community in wider civil society movements and coalitions. So the four call for action. So the first, I'm not going to, I'm just mentioning, but Neil already mentioned in the People's Group, so I'm also happy to see this connection, is the role of faith communities to support young people actions. In particular, there was an emphasis on the climate strike, so already next Fridays, if you are teachers, if you are leading an university or in schools, allow that those actions could continue and could be supported. The second call is for a joint faith institutional announcements on divestment for fossil fuels, maybe at the next UN General Assembly or the high-level panel forum in September 2019. The third one, I tried to summarize, but we had a lot of discussion and several inputs on giving a particular attention to biodiversity. So there was a very concrete proposal to prepare in advance, make sure that we participate as faith communities and engage indigenous people towards the Biodiversity Convention in 2020. And here I wanted to highlight the contribution from one person of our group about the engagement of indigenous people. Really to make sure that when we have this kind of discussion, we really, first of all, listen, and we also listen to the treasures, listen to the knowledge of those communities. We saw in the last 2 days how precious is this contribution. And the fourth and the last, to make sure and have interfaith community science-based targets, because especially on energy efficiency and CO2 emissions, because we saw also that to raise the bar and to make sure that we keep global warming under 1.5, we need to put ourselves clear targets, and we recognize the added value of this partnership among faith and science communities.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And without further ado, I will give the floor and the chair to Bruno Marie Dufay, the Secretary of the Dicastery for promoting interhuman development, and he will lead us towards the closing session. Thank you.
I don't want to keep the time. We promised to Mr. Muller to have time to propose some conclusion or some thinking about our conference, our dialogue, and he has some. He has to see the watch because he has to go. But I'm very moved to propose four terms, four ideas. I listen with you now, because when we began this conference, we realize the challenge of dialogue between religions and the challenge about sustainable development goals. If I listen with you about partnership is a way, and we already said that dialogue is a way. Dialogue is to consent, to know more, and sometimes to discover or rediscover the tradition of the others. And it's very important to be in this attitude to receive the identity, the specificity, the history, the memory of our communities, our religious communities, and this richness of our community. The second word I would like to propose to you that about people is that we need a vision. We need a vision. We need to receive the richness of our traditions, but we need a vision. And it was I think the meaning of hope when we began our conference. We need to have memory, and we need to give hope to this development, to this integral development, to this peaceful development. And the third word about prosperity could be to continue our research about meaning of investment. What does it mean to invest? To invest. To invest is to put means to encourage all the talents, all the capacity, the capabilities of people and of community, local communities. And to invest is to trust, not only to give means. We need means, but we need trust. And we cannot go on without trust. We cannot go on without this consideration of the promise in each person, in each community. And about peace, it's really interesting to keep this verb to understand. Understanding. What is to understand? To understand is to be sensitive, to be touched, to be in contact with the others, and not to be in the possibility to explain too fast what we know. It's not only to know, but to understand, and we have to clarify and to continue this challenge of understanding, mutual understanding. And about planet, I think we cannot put on light the concept of biodiversity, because we are completely in front of this challenge today. Biodiversity. We need to continue this reflection about biodiversity. I just want, before leaving the floor to Mr. Michael Muller, I remember this question, what is a religion? Yesterday, we have this question. And it's very interesting to leave from this conference with the 4 points. Religion as a memory, tradition, religions as a conviction, religions as an experience of common responsibility, and religions as a thinking about future. Memory, conviction, responsibility, future. And I think of the reference the Pope Francis put on the head of his message for the 1st of January. In each home, in each house, in each country, where you are going to go, offer peace. Offer peace. If you meet in this place a friend of peace, your peace will be with this friend of peace. And perhaps the first challenge is to offer peace everywhere. Thank you. So I want to let Mr. Michael Morrow, we know he is a Director General of the United Nations Office at Geneva. Thank you so much to be present, to participate, and to conclude this, if it's possible, to conclude our dialogue.
Thank you very much. We're not going to conclude our dialogue. This is just the first step. Eminencies, Excellencies, dear friends, it really has been a great privilege for me to share the last 2.5 days with all of you. And I would like to congratulate every one of you for a very rich debate and a really wonderful collaborative approach to the many issues we have tackled together. I have to tell you that this is one of the best conferences on SDG implementation that I've attended for quite a while, and I go home with a renewed sense of optimism and purpose. And in this context, let me once again express my sincere gratitude to His Eminence Cardinal Turkson and the Dicastery for promoting integral human development, as well as the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogues for bringing us together. Let me start by paraphrasing my boss, Secretary General Guterres, when he gave his State of the World address at the beginning of this year. He described where we are right now in a very succinct way that encapsulates our challenges. And he said that the problems we're facing are more and more connected, and the solutions are more and more fragmented. And if we don't reverse that urgently, we are going to be in even greater trouble than we are today. The challenge of reversing that seriously negative equation is, of course, what we have been discussing here in many different ways. In our discussions over the past days, I was once again struck by the power of the 2030 Agenda to serve as a unifier, a truly global roadmap, and not just in terms of vision and values, but also in terms of fostering tangible action at the grassroots level. The values part of the equation was always very clear to me, but bears constant repetition. The action part is now the most urgent. In both action and values, we're all after the same thing. And with the 2030 Agenda, we now have a blueprint to really integrate our efforts. This was crystal clear from both the substance and the tenor of this conference, at least to me. Food and water, health and climate, urbanization, energy, consumption, sustainable peace. The list of topics we tackled was broad and ambitious. And with these explorations, we came closer to a deeper and more holistic understanding of the SDGs and their extraordinary ability to bring everyone on the same page and provoke a behavioral, even cultural, change that is very much needed. The strength of these goals, as most of us know, rest on 3 strong principles that speak to every one of us. The first one, to leave no one behind, the bedrock of the 2030 Agenda, was present in almost every discussion over the past 2.5 days. That in itself is cause for optimism. The second one is just as strong, namely that the 17 goals are indivisible and completely integrated. You cannot address one without addressing the other 16. We heard yesterday from one of our speakers that without peace, we will not be able to implement the SDGs. Now, that may be true in many cases, but as far as I'm concerned, it's even more true that without the full realization of the Sustainable Development Goals, there certainly will be no peace. And this reminds me of a quote by my old boss, Secretary General Kofi Annan, who never tired of pointing out that there can be no peace without development, that no development without peace, and that neither of these can happen without human rights. How right he was. And let that insight drive our actions and narrative as we move forward. The third principle is a powerful fact that we, every single one of us, are responsible for their implementation. These goals are not something that you can just sit back and expect governments to deliver on. If you do that, it will not happen. This is the role of a very different, polycentric, multi-stakeholder effort in which every faith, business, civil society organization, academic institution, media outlet, every citizen, man or woman, old or young, have to be active participants. We must create entirely new kind of partnerships, or we simply will not make it, as Martin just told us his group came to the same conclusion. And we will not make it if we don't involve every single woman on our planet in this extraordinarily difficult and complex endeavor. It's really not rocket science, folks. If we want to save our planet for succeeding generations, we simply cannot afford to leave half of humanity outside of our efforts. The last 70 years has brought us a level of prosperity and well-being that is unprecedented in human history. We live longer, we are healthier, we are better educated, etc. But now we have to deal with the cost of that progress. A sick planet, rising inequality, and a massive trust deficit, just to name a few. All of these issues and the new governance structures we have to put in place to resolve them is what the SDGs were designed to address, and what our conversation over the past couple of days has been about and should continue to be about. The sense of purpose, the obvious synergies that have come to the surface, and the very collaborative spirit that we have seen emerge gives hope and needs to be leveraged into further action on the ground. The 5 working groups that we have just heard from have given us a number of actions that we collectively need to move on. And I must say, I find myself nodding in agreement to pretty much everything that, that was said by the 5 coordinators. Supporting the young, women and gender, under people, quite clearly. And the young go through many of these. It reminds me of this Swedish girl I was watching, Greta. Yeah, I was watching her sitting next to the Secretary General in Katowice when she looked him in the eyes and said, "We're not here to ask you for help. We have given up on you. You have failed us. We are here to tell you that change is coming, and we are the change." So I think all of us we need to get with that program and help them achieve that with everything we have. On the issue of prosperity, and particularly I'm not going to comment on everything that was said, but let me just say a few words about sort of the redefinition of prosperity is clearly something we need to look at. We cannot continue with the kind of development programs and projects and systems that we have in place right now. They need to be rethought. But in terms of investment, just wanted to tell you that this is one of the areas in which we're doing a lot of work in my office in Geneva, and with Katie, my colleague who's with me today, where we are in the process of, and this is linked also to the new partnerships, where we're in the process of talking to people we didn't even know existed just 6 months ago. We're sitting down with the business community, with the finance community, with the investment community, to come up with new tools and to come up with new ways of making sure that that the world invests in a sustainable way, and that we do so together. There is an extraordinary amount of idle money lying around that is just looking for good places to invest it. And there's an enormous amount of projects that have been devised that don't have any money. This is kind of a marriage made in heaven that we are brokering right now, and it's coming up with some quite extraordinary results. This is stuff that I'm more than happy to share with all of you as we move along and as it becomes much more clear. We're in the process of trying to figure out how to create a pipeline that will deliver projects that are crafted in such a way that they're attractive to investors, so that can do what they really more and more want to do, which is, of course, to make money, but at the same to do good. So watch that space. Partnerships. I'll speak about that again in a moment, but I just wanted to again underline the absolute imperative to come up with new partnerships. I'll give you another example. And one of the wonderful things that we're seeing happening now because of the SDGs is the readiness to actually engage in partnerships where before people didn't want to talk to each other, they hugged their information, they worked in silos. All of this is changing very rapidly. One example I'll give you is also things that we're doing in Geneva, where 6 months ago we created something called the 2030 ecosystem. It started with 15 people. We have today 350 people over 6 months later from all walks of life, all of whom are sitting together, talking to each other, leveraging their individual mandates, expertise, finances, and knowledge to come together in a much more impactful implementation of the SDGs. It's pretty extraordinary. It's a kind of a miracle group or pool where we throw in problems and then stuff starts to happen in a most extraordinary way that we've never seen before. So there is hope. And all of the things that you came up with, I really applaud, and I fully subscribe to them. But I'd like to come up with a few more, if you don't mind. I was impressed yesterday by the suggestion by our colleague, Bhai Sahib Mohinder Singh Ahluwalia, who suggested that our Secretary General should set up an inter-religious advisory group. This obviously makes a lot of sense if we're going to be working together in a better way. And I will look into this and how it fits with a multi-faith advisory council that was established at the end of last year by the United Nations General Assembly, and see how we can take this further. Let me also draw your attention. We spoke about my colleague Adama Dieng, who spoke in the group on peace. But I just want you to draw all of your attention to and support the plan of his action plan for religious leaders and actors to prevent incitement to violence that could lead to atrocity crimes. As you know, he's a special representative of the Secretary General for the Prevention of Genocide. But that plan, when you go through it, has quite a lot of really great practical suggestions for action that all of you can and should take forward with your communities. We need to get better at the narrative. And I'd like to suggest that you, both as organizations and individuals, help spread the word about the SDGs as a unifying plan of action. For example, I have suggested, and maybe Cardinal Turkson will be nodding, and I'm sorry that I pushed that point with you, but I suggested that the Pope tell every single priest to speak about the SDGs every Sunday in his sermon.
That's one right there.
This suggestion applies to every religion, so take note, please. I also would really like to see if His Holiness would do a Laudato Si for the SDGs. And we'll see if that's possible. When I listened to him yesterday, the seeds for that were really in his speech. It was really a fantastic speech yesterday. Now, all of you have really incredible, powerful platforms as faith organizations. Speak to your communities, your families, your children, your neighbors, your colleagues. You are closest to the action at the grassroots level. You are the ones we have to rely on for lasting impact. And to help you in your efforts, you will see on the screen right now the links to 2 publications that my office has produced and which have found really quite great resonance, particularly among the young. In the Fairy Tales for a Fair World, we have taken a number of tales from around the world and adapted them, took a little poetic license and adapted them to explain the SDGs to the younger generation. These books are now in many languages. They're being distributed in schools, particularly in Latin America. and actually they make for fun reading. It's not just for the young. I had a colleague who was my age, who was heading another organization, who had just given it to, and he came 2 days later and wanted another one. I said, "What happened to the one I just gave you?" He said, my mother pinched it." The 170 Daily Actions pamphlet gives the reader 10 suggestions for each of the 17 goals for actions he or she can take in their personal lives to realize the SDGs. This is one of the most popular little publications we've done. It was written by a 19-year-old in my office, and we've printed them in at least about a dozen languages so far, in the tens of thousands. And I have now governments, I have big businesses, people coming that they want to distribute it. And I'm more than happy to share it with you as well. Please share them widely. If you would like to distribute them or have them in a printed version, please let me know, and we will send you the templates so that you can have them printed. As we have agreed, and I come back to the partnership issue, over the past days, we need new and innovative partnerships that leverage our respective strengths, break down silos, cast away our traditional competitive approaches, and thus increase the likelihood that we will have the needed impact. We can only make this happen together. I can't repeat that enough. It has been encouraging to hear about the many partnership initiatives like the PART that are already in action. We need more of these, and we need to strengthen and broaden the existing ones. So we have now established between us a collaborative process, and I hope to see it being taken forward in the months and years to come, and I'm proud to be your partner in these efforts. You have reinforced for me that it is not enough to mobilize minds around the SDGs. We must also mobilize hearts and souls. As teachers and guides, you are agents of change and can inspire people to new levels of service and involvement. You can help bridge the chasm of ignorance, fear, and misunderstanding that plague our world. And you can make our global actions resonate in the hearts and souls of individuals the world over. Future generations may come to say of us that we never achieved what we set out to do. But it is up to us to make sure that they may never say that we failed because we lacked faith or permitted narrow self-interest, egoism, or short-sightedness to dilute our efforts. So let us together close the gap between the world as it is now and the world as we know it can and should be. Thank you very much for these inspiring 2.5 days. I leave a happy man. Have a safe trip home and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michael Mulder. We let you to take your taxi. Thank you very much.
Yeah, he has to catch his flight, so we...
So I'm going to let Eminence Cardinal Turkson, Prefect of our dicastery, to offer to you some concluding remarks. But before, I just want to invite you to see the real great drawing wall. And just to keep, you can see that from your seat, religion as a global orchestra. So we are to realize a symphony of our diversity, of our initiatives, and of our conviction, moral, ethical, economical, and political conviction. And I think it's really interesting. And thank you again for your way to draw. Thank you. It's really a good pedagogy. I think we could continue that in our community, just to have one word, one sun, one flower. I think very interesting to support our reflection, to go on this reflection. Thank you again. I let Cardinal Turkson for the conclusion.
I'd just like to thank everybody and for what he just said. So my thing is just to thank people. At the opening ceremony, I had to go off text because of time. I do the same thing now. People, as you can tell, we knew that a lot of people would have to leave before the conclusion to catch their flights. And we just had one, so we don't want to keep people away from their flights. We tried to bring some runways in the Vatican, but we didn't have the space. So no plane lands here. It's only a small helicopter that can take off from a heliopod at the back there, but no real planes. So dear friends, I think I just need to thank everybody. Monsieur Brunet just began thanking the sketchers at the back. And that's just what I want to do based on two small things. When we met the Pope yesterday, the point that we made to him is that we brought you all together because we didn't want the wisdom if any of your constituent groups go unheeded or lost. And that's what we've just sought to do. If you refer to this as an orchestra, that was also the idea of having an orchestra right at the beginning. And happily it wasn't cacophonous, so it was a very delightful sound that was produced Thursday evening, and this has also been that. If you can have all of that on that piece of paper with some downstairs, then it's also not been cacophonous. So I want to thank you. I think the imagery, following on the imagery of orchestra, I think what we want to do is that capturing the wisdom of all of you, it's also been inspired by the literature of the Jewish religion, the Tanakh, the Old Testament of Christians, and several other groups. At creation, at a certain point, God collected all the waters under the heaven to one place to become the sea. And that's what we have tried to do, to collect all the waters of your wisdom under the heavens into one place. That one place has not been determined yet, but that's what we've tried to do, to create a sea out of your various traditions, initiatives, and expertise. So there is a treasure now that exists. Now, just as a sea may be considered as separating continents, it also connects continents. It also connects land masses, and that's what we would want you to see our gathering here as having become. We try to fashion links and connections between all of us and wherever we go. So yes, putting together our traditions, we formed this huge resource material. Mr. Miller referred to it. We try to capture some of them on that clipboard at the back, but essentially it is that, and the idea is that this connects us. Monsieur Dufay gave you the content of religion, but phenomenologically, religion is also connection. The human being a relational being, everything that he lives and thrives on is linkages and connection. That is what religio does. It links and it connects us, because that's our nature, to be relational and to stay in relationship. So that's why we've just tried to begin. I said at the beginning that Mr. Mueller, who just left, was the one who suggested right in 2015, after the SDGs were passed in New York, that the Vatican and the religious groups tried to do something. It took us some time, but we finally done it. And we've done it not to conclude a process, but to initiate and to begin a process. So that process, further conduct of this process may take place anywhere. Several people have suggested to me about an event coming out in Germany, Lindau. That will be a meeting of the World Conference of Religions. Somebody has also whispered to me another meeting coming up in Korea. And so all of these meetings are going to be, can be considered, having been spawned off from this meeting. We take no credit for it, but we'll be glad to pursue this to make our goals and ambitions achieved. Then, what we seek to do with all the initiatives that would follow over here is captured by a word and expression that every now and then came up of our discussion. The need for a lot of human societies and systems to be accompanied by ethics or ethical considerations. You're not asking for a magic. You're asking for something that is true of a human being. Ethics is from Old Sanskrit, etu, and that just comes from when you pile up stone to create a fence around your cattle, your sheep, and whatever, you have created ethics. So it's the same stone wall that you pile up to protect something that you consider precious and valuable. And when we talk about, therefore, accompanying anything with ethics, we're talking about just accompanying things with a type of defense system that we need to put in place to protect that which we cherish and that which is precious to us. For us now, it's been the 5 Ps that have been mentioned over and alongside the over 17 goals that have been advanced, and most importantly, human life and the garden home that God created for us. So it's an invitation to all of us to bring our resources to create this stone fence wall around the things that we cherish, our earth on which we live, and the human life itself that lives on this. We want to thank all of you for this. We will try to collect all the speeches and addresses made here into some kind of acts, some essay collection, whatever, and make them all available to you. Most firstly on our website, and then for those, when we get it printed, also go to the very many who will be interested in looking at it. So all of this event can be revisited. Other group I like to thank usually remains always hidden, but they do a lot of work. That is behind a glass window upstairs. So those are our translators. Then we want to also thank people who will never be up here in this room, but who also keep us going. That will be those in the cafeteria and those to whom we'll be going to right from here, those who give our restoration. We thank our communication unit upstairs there. That has been enabling us to communicate and to talk on the different things. We want to thank the Vatican Office of the Governorate that put this facility at our disposal, enable us to meet over here, as well as the big conference or the concert hall downstairs for having made all of this possible for us. And
just an announcement.
Okay. And lastly, we want to thank all of you for your very generous response to our invitation. If you had not, would not be here. It is true that, as always happens, we still have a lot of badges unclaimed in the office upstairs. It just means that some wanted to come but could not come. Visa problems, that happens all the time. Or some last minute, hitches in a village or village or family plans and all of that. But we still appreciate their desire that they express of wanting to come, and we thank them even in absentia. But all of with these words of gratitude come also our prayerful wishes for a very safe return back home. Carry with you the blessings of God or Allah or whatever deity you call upon when you pray, to still shower His blessings on you, accompanying everything that you do, and God willing, we'll get together again someday, somewhere, to advance the well-being of humanity. Thank you.
Two quick announcements. One is that, as projected up here on the screen, we have a Mass on Sunday, a Mass of Thanksgiving for this wonderful conference. Your Father Josh over here will preside. You're all welcome. It will be a mass in the Catholic rite, but you know, everybody is welcome. It will be outside in the gardens. And if you see the address up there, then you should, you know, take a picture of it. And that's where we'll be. It's, well, 10 minutes walk from here, from the, yes. And the other announcement is that the bus, for those of you who are at the Ajiv Hotel, will be outside starting from 2:30 onwards. And Luca, over here, will take you to the buses by 2:45, okay? Make sure that by 2:45 you found Luca, otherwise you will not get back to the hotel. Yes, so lunch is now.